got down there, what did you find?
Well, I went with Green, and he showed me the tracks, actually 2 or 3 occurrences. All right, I can certainly verify that there were tracks there. They were not just single tracks. That is, the main occurrence, at least, was not just single tracks. They looked like the track of a person, or let's say creature in this case, walking down a dusty road, partly on the road, and in part there were areas where it had gone off the road and then come back on again. Actually, in this main occurrence, there were the tracks of 2 individuals, one larger and one smaller. In some places, the tracks wandered off the road, as I said. Sometimes they apparently stepped up on a bank or stepped over fallen logs and this sort of thing. The tracks themselves they looked like giant human footprints, except that they're extraordinarily flat. The very first that I saw them, my reaction was, well, this is just a rather poor carving of a footprint carved out of a plank. They're very flat, but of course this impression is somewhat destroyed by the number of them, the naturalness of them, of the placement and sequence, and the fact that the tracks are not all identical. There's movement apparent in the toes, for instance, from one to the next. My conclusion after studying these was that it had to have been made by a hominid, that is, by a man or a creature very closely related to a man. It was definitely not, as some people have suggested that these could be, it was not the footprints of a bear or any other animal. They must have been the tracks made by a hominid, which means one of 2 things, and there's only 2 possibilities here. They were made by the creature that they're purported to be made by, let's call it the Sasquatch, or they were an intentional hoax made by human beings. Now, we reach an enigma right there, because both of these possibilities are impossible. The zoologists assure us, most of them, that Sasquatches do not exist, cannot exist, and on the whole their arguments are very convincing, and I'm predisposed to accept them. However, the tracks are there. There's certain other kinds of evidence as well, but the tracks are there. They had to be made, and it's very difficult to explain them away as a hoax, because, as I said, the number of them, the naturalness of the placement, the fact that they stepped over obstructions, logs and up banks and so on, makes it difficult. They at first glance, they could have been done by a man wearing false feet, but this rather falls down because of the depth of impression. Now, I'm not a physicist. We did call in a party from the college in Arcata, a party of scientists who looked at these. They were not quite ready to accept them either, but there was a physicist among them, and when we pressed him on this, he didn't want to give an estimate, but he felt that the weight required to impress the ground to the depth that these tracks were impressed in that particular kind of soil would have been much more than any normal man. He said a minimum, he thought, of something like 400 pounds. So it could not have been any normal man wearing tracks, even, and he couldn't do it by jumping down either, because the track would have sort of spattered out in a different way, which seems to come down to the possibility of some kind of a heavy machine making them, which would have to be a very sophisticated machine. Frankly, I can't conceive of any machine that would do it and meet all the other requirements that I noticed, this, stepping over barriers and this kind of thing. So those things are very hard to explain away. And also from interviews with other people, I learned afterwards that these tracks have been seen very frequently over quite a wide area, not just in that area, but right up into British Columbia as well. I have heard reports of these things being seen in extremely remote areas where nobody who is out to intentionally hoodwink the public would think of going, because if you're trying to play a hoax, you're going to take some care to see that it's going to be found, and some of these places are in very unlikely locations to be found. So this is hard to explain away. Also, the fact that these things have been reported over, I get this only from John Green, but there's no reason to disbelieve him, that there are reports of these extending back around a century. So It's very hard to explain it away as a hoax from these points of view, and yet, you know, I cannot either accept the possibility that they were done by Sasquatches. There we are, it's an enigma.
You've spoken to some Indians about this, and of course the Sasquatch has been a part of their folklore for a long time. Are they amazed that we doubt the existence of these creatures, and how do they talk about them?
My feeling of the Indian stories is that the Sasquatch, or creatures that could be interpreted as the same as the Sasquatch, are treated in two ways in the Indian stories, and many of the Indian groups of the Northwest and British Columbia have stories of creatures like this. Now, they are mythological creatures in one sense, in the same sense that wolf or raven or any one of several other creatures that are treated in the myths are mythical creatures. That is, they have human attributes, they give spirit power and so on. But the Sasquatch, unlike some other creatures of myth, you know, some obviously fabulous creatures of myth, is also treated by many of these Indian groups, of which I've heard, as a normal member of the fauna, just like bears and wolves and ravens and so on. And well, this would tend to support, of course, the hypothesis that the thing does exist.
So you don't discount?
No, I certainly don't discount the Indian stories. As a matter of fact, they're pretty good evidence for the people who do believe in the Sasquatch. There are very interesting reports of people having seen them, and frankly, I consider that the best line of evidence. The tracks is another line of evidence. The third line of evidence is the photographic. I've seen 2 or 3 badly blurred prints that are purported to show such a creature, but I can't make anything out of them. They could be anything. And then there's Roger Patterson's film. Now, I'm not competent to comment on that. Most scientists who are competent and have commented have tended to dismiss the film, but I just can't say anything on that.
You saw the film yourself?
I've seen the film, yeah, I've seen it a couple of times. It is fairly generally true, I think, among local scientists, and I feel a little bit sorry about it. Some of them have had the same reaction I have, that while it's an interesting subject and somebody should do it, it's not my field, and I don't want to get off onto this. But since then, during the last 3 years, I have heard of a number of competent people, physical anthropologists and primatologists, who have taken an interest in this and are trying to pursue it. But the question is, how do you pursue it? You see, I've told you the types of evidence that exist, 3 types of photographic, which for the moment will dismiss the tracks and the sightings. But as I started to say, I don't think I finished it, there's no real concrete evidence. There's no bones, fur, or what have you of a Sasquatch. And the minute somebody comes and shows me a Sasquatch bone, I'm going to believe it. You can't fake bones, and they're very reliable as to species of animal that it represents and so on. You can't bring a cow bone and call it a Sasquatch bone because it's quite obviously a cow bone. You can't bring a human bone and call it a Sasquatch bone because it's quite obviously a human bone. You can bring a bone of a chimpanzee and you can see that it's like a human bone, but not a human bone. So if somebody brought a Sasquatch bone, it would be possible to see that it was similar to a human bone, but larger and different in certain features and yet close to it. And I think there'd be no question when that happened. But there is no such thing. With all these reports, nobody has ever produced concrete evidence. The fauna of Western North America is very well known. Even the most insignificant species are well recorded and written up, and that something described as being so huge and apparently so obvious has never been seen over the century and a half that this well, okay, John Green will check me on that one. He says, of course, many people have seen it, and I've heard many people say they've seen it, but that it has never been seen or brought the attention of somebody competent to evaluate it is really remarkable, because we, as far as we know, every other species, even the most insignificant, has.
Ordinance number 69-01. Be it hereby ordained by the Board of County Commissioners of Skamania County, Washington. Whereas there is evidence to indicate the possible existence in Skamania County of a nocturnal primate mammal, variously described as an ape-like creature or a subspecies of Homo sapiens, and whereas both legend and purported recent sightings and spoor support this possibility, and whereas this creature is generally and commonly known as a Sasquatch, Yeti, Bigfoot, or giant hairy ape, and whereas publicity attendant upon such real or imagined sightings has resulted in an influx of scientific investigators, as well as casual hunters, many armed with lethal weapons, and whereas the absence of specific laws covering the taking of specimens encourages laxity in the use of firearms and other deadly devices, and poses a clear and present threat to the safety and well-being of persons living or traveling within the boundaries of Skamania County, as well as to the creatures themselves. Therefore be it resolved that any premeditated, willful, and wanton slaying of any such creature shall be deemed a felony, punishable by a fine not to exceed $10,000, and or imprisonment in the county jail for a period not to exceed 5 years. Be it further resolved that the situation existing constitutes an emergency, and as such this ordinance is effective immediately. Adopted this first day of April, 1969.